Great. The Visiting Artist Program, funded by PAFA's graduate program and PNC Arts Alive program, brings an outstanding roster of local, national, and international artists to PAFA each semester for lectures, critiques, and workshops. The program exposes students and the public to a range of artists, artistic approaches, and fosters discussion about contemporary arts and ideas. This afternoon, we are pleased to have Ludovic Nkoth joining us. Ludovic was born in Ludovic. I practiced it a bunch of times and I apologize in advance by.
No worries at all.
Yaoundé,
yes.
Yaoundé, Cameroon in 1994 and lives and works in New York City. Nkoth, and am I pronouncing your last name right? I should have checked with you earlier, but I want to double check.
I pronounce it Nkoth.
That is helpful. Nkoth, shit.
That was perfect.
Nkoth completed his BFA at the University of South Carolina and holds an MFA in painting from Hunter College. Recent solo exhibitions include Don't Take This Too in Francois Giblet in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Yes. And UCS at Luce Gallery in Turin. Nkoth was featured in group exhibition Black Voices and Black Microcosms 2020 and CF Hill Art Space in Stockholm, as well as group exhibitions at Anthony Gallery Chicago and Ross and Kramer New York. His work is held in the collection of the Hughes Museum in Shanghai. Ludovic's figures participate in the fiction and lived experiences that comprise his own identity synthesis. Each muddled expression and porous boundary imbues his paintings with a tender incandescence of distant memory. The navigations of both belonging and outsiderhood in African and American spaces underscore much of Ludovic's work and inform the future building of kinship, solidarity, and self-determination that is central to his practice. Please join me in a warm welcome to Ludovic, and you may now begin sharing your screen.
I will begin sharing screen now. All right. Can everyone see this? Yes? All right, perfect. So first of all, thank you so much for that, Lily. And I want to thank everyone at PAFA for having me. It's a great honor to be here speaking about my practice to you guys today. And I wish we could do this in person, but as we know, COVID hasn't allowed us to do many things. So I'm just honored to be here speaking with you guys today. My work is very autobiographical at times, so I think it would be fair for me to start with a short, boring story about my background and how I got here today. So as Lily mentioned before, I'm born in Cameroon and raised, and I migrated to the United States at the early age of 13, rejoining my biological father and his side of the family here. And, you know, being raised in a space where at first, when I arrived, I really wasn't familiar with the language that well, and the people and just the norms, everything was different. So as someone that has been greatly influenced by mobility, I found that in my work, this sense of belonging is always something that's showing up in literally every piece that I make, you know, and also a sense of identity, because whenever I moved to the United States, for the first years, I was this outsider trying to infiltrate, I feel, this culture, but in a weird way, a culture of people that already resembled me in the communities that I existed in South Carolina. But also, when I went back to Cameroon, I found myself, for example, in 2018, when I visited back for the first time after moving to the States, I found myself operating as an outsider too, because of the way people were looking at me. All of a sudden, I wasn't Cameroonian anymore. I was now this idea of an American figure to these people, even though I still spoke the native language, which would be for my part of the country was French, because Cameroon is supposed to be a bilingual country, but we'll get into that further down the road. So I had this interaction with this one native Cameroonian where he, in that situation, he made me feel like I wasn't really Cameroonian because I gave that up while moving, but I really didn't understand that at that moment. So after returning from that trip, I really sat with myself and started thinking of this idea of home, you know, and the fact that after going back home, I still had to search for that home within that space. And coming back to the United States, where I was supposed to feel like home now, after I get back here, all of a sudden I become an African again. And in the work, it's been interesting trying to figure out exactly where I stand in these spaces. So I've made the idea of searching for a home at the focal point of my practice. And now I'll go through shortly to talk to you guys a little bit about a little of the context that goes behind the practice as well, because my practice is not versed around a lot of research, but I love to just research a little bit of the things that specifically that I know already based on Cameroon, because every time I research something new, I always found out something that I didn't know about my people. And also existing in this community, in this space in the United States, I've had to, for me to blend in and to feel as American as I can, I've had to catch up with this culture and actually find ways to become an American, you know, both on paper and off paper. So in the practice, I've been very influenced by the traditions that happen directly in Cameroon and its tribes. So Cameroon is, I think we have about 240 something native tribes in the country. And each tribe is known to speak a native tongue as well. So for this specific mask here is from the Bamileke tribe, which is one of the biggest community and tribes in Cameroon. So as a kid growing up there, a lot of the ceremonies that I was encountering were coming from a lot of these tribes, because a lot of our neighbors and a lot of my close friends at that time were, they're called Bamileke. So a lot of them were Bamileke. And this mask it's called an elephant mask. And you can see through the ears and the long neck, which is supposed to represent the elephant trunk. And also on the other side of the slide, you could see this ornament made out of curry shells. And you can see it being repeated here on the mask as well. And that just dates back to the history of, you know, curry shells. What I like to do is juxtapose the history of an item before and to present. In present day, now we have, for example, in fashion, this object became so commercialized that it lost a lot of its meaning that it had back on the continent. So many years ago, in a lot of several parts of West Africa, the curry shell was used as currency. But, you know, during colonization, a lot of the colonizers found ways to unstabilize this currency and find a way to take over that and repurpose what these shells were meant to be. So for my people, this was currency and a way for them to directly use something that was very organic and also associated with spiritual elements from the water. And this was taken away through brainwashing for them to become, you know, where we are in history. And I pay attention to a lot of ceremonial traditions too. And outside of Africa, we refer to it as voodoo. Again, this was given to this name was given to these practices when Africa was discovered. And through voodoo, for Africans and for myself, we experience, you know, the world and first perspective in a way, because through voodoo, you're in touch with your natural elements such as water, air, and just nature. You know, voodoo for the people was a way to reconnect with our ancestors and just to feel at one with the past and the present. But because that was also something that my people believe strongly in, this was also turned into a negative thing throughout colonization. But a lot of the times when I was a child in Cameroon, I went through the ceremonies without really knowing the purpose or the significance behind a lot of these. So now in the works, I bring them up in a way to start conversation, but also to question the purpose of these ceremonies, and to also just educate myself and the public, you know, because a lot of the times when we hear voodoo, we have a direct negative connotation to its whole practice, whereas back home, this could be almost seen as a religion because a lot of people still practice this. And one of the animals that's used in my work a lot and in a lot of these voodoo traditions is the chicken, and chicken and goat. But for me, I like to focus on the chicken because I have personal experiences with that as a kid back home. And also throughout a lot of research, it keeps reoccurring. But in a lot of traditions, the way the chicken is used as a sacrifice. It's used as a sacrificial flesh, where the blood and the chicken could be used as a protection element for the figure that's being practiced over, or for prosperity, or anything that you might be wanting to be in conversation with the spiritual realm. So thank you for that. I'm going to get into the works now. And we have a few things to look at. So I'm going to try to move at a good pace so that we can cover everything. But the works are arranged in chronological order from, I believe, I want to say 2018 to present time. And throughout the work, I'll just be talking about the things that I'm thinking while creating these things, what I'm going through while making them, and also a lot of the battles that happen while creating something, whether it be a painting, a sculpture, or anything of that sort. So we start with my first love, which is a piece on an acrylic piece on canvas. So when I first moved to the United States, I was looking for ways to fit in, and I was looking for ways to understand the culture. So I started focusing on hair, because I was thinking to myself, what is one direct thing that my community here in the United States share with my community in back home, Cameroon? And I started thinking, oh, the idea of hair and the history that hair carries with it, and how that history has been passed on through time here from the slaves that were brought over from Africa, and also just the history that is being told currently through that hair practice. And I like to make my work a little more personal too. So I started thinking to myself, how do I connect with this story and this lineage that hair brings to this culture here and the culture there? So for me, I was introduced to the caretaking of hair through a barbershop. My mother was, in this piece, is depicting a younger me with a version of what could be my mother in the barbershop. My earliest recollection of being in a barbershop was with my mother. And I was thinking that here in the States, as a young man, you will be introduced to something like this. Your father, you know, you're a young man that's being introduced to the round table. That's what I like to think of a barbershop to be, because when you're in a barbershop, whatever you do in your life or your status outside of the barbershop doesn't really matter. Whenever you come in the barbershop, whether you be a doctor or a janitor, your conversation has, you know, the same amount of importance. So I wanted to first be around a round table when talking about these things, but I also wanted to show this love that, you know, I was building up with this figure going through this process that was introduced to me. And now with doing this whole series on barbershops here in the States, I was able to find also, deeper traditions that we hold back in Cameroon around hair. So with this, I was able to speak to, two different parts of the world that sometimes I belong in and sometimes I don't belong in, and kind of let those fight for space. And this piece was done in that same body of work, a Black man's portrait. So again, I was thinking about this great figure that a lot of us see in barbershops, but I was thinking, how do I make this more about, again, my life and things that I'm seeing around me every day? And I was thinking back at my time in college and high school in South Carolina. A lot of the young males that were around me were either brutally treated by the justice system or the police all the time, anytime you walked around in South Carolina as a Black man. So I started thinking that, can this grid also operate as what we're being labeled by society in the South? Because I put this orange suit on these Black figures to represent a lot of the clothing that would be worn in, these prison cells too. And I wanted to do that as a conversation starter, just to see what it does too. And this was what I arrived in. And in a lot of my works, because I use these works as mirrors, I like to include myself, whether it be a self-portrait or whether it be just a feeling that I'm going through into the pieces too. So there's a lot of me from self-portrait and other things in this works as well. This Paul Biya, this was around 2018 too. This piece was made right after my first trip back to Cameroon. So from 2007 to 2018, I wasn't able to travel back to Cameroon because of a number of reasons, but I was able to reconnect with the continent in 2018. And while I was there, I got to reconnect with my biological mother and her family. And there were a lot of political unrest going around the country at that time in 2018, where at the beginning, I was talking about Cameroon being bilingual, being a bilingual country. So 80% of Cameroon is French and 20% is supposed to be an English-speaking population. But because of the government, the English population is now really looked at as a Cameroonian population. So in 2018, from 2016 to, and I think it's still going on in parts of Cameroon, there was a little bit of beginning of a civil war between Cameroonians and also between the government, where our president that's still in power right now, his name is Paul Biya. He's been in power for the last, I want to say 37 years now. He's the only president I've ever known on the country, and he's the only one my father has known since he was a young kid. So while I was there, I had conversations with the people, and even my mother were talking about the things that this president was doing to the country and how the country really hasn't moved since he's been in power, and the way he's killing off a lot of the English population because he's a Francophone, and a lot of the Francophone don't care about the Anglophone side. So after my visit to Cameroon, my mother sends me, this gown because it was around the time of elections. And the way we work, similar to here for elections, you have either a hat or a shirt that has the candidates on. So for Cameroon, because of our textile history, what we do a lot of the time is we print gowns or we print fabrics with the candidates, and a lot of the women and men go to their seamstresses and they design clothing to be worn throughout this period of time. So I remember having negative conversations about this individual being the president with this figure. And later the figure sends me a gown with his face on it, almost praising him. So I was a little confused at that very moment. And, this just brought me back to the idea of brainwashing that, this guy playing the presidential role has brainwashed these people so much that they're not okay with what he's doing, but they're putting up with it because that's the only power they know. So I wanted to capture this figure, imprisoned in this chair-looking thing, and I wanted to ornate her with different symbols that I was seeing around Cameroon, but also symbols that could represent Cameroon. So, and I also wanted to depict how manipulating this president is, and how he's not groping, but the way he's taking advantage of these people. So I wanted to position his hands right here on her chest, just violating their personal spaces, I felt a lot of the time. And I wanted to put this figure, which is this strong figure, and I wanted her to almost feel bigger than life or stronger than life, but also imprisoned around this chair that she can obviously exit out of. But on the sides, you see these spikes that are kind of poking her to stay where she is, which is what the president was doing for the country at that very moment. So this is where this piece came from. After my trip to Cameroon, I was very interested in just the mask making, because when I was there as a kid, a lot of the people close to me were making masks, but as a kid, I was just interested in the rapid feeling I got from just a quick sketch. I wasn't too interested in investing my time into making a whole mask. I wanted rapid satisfaction, so I would just sketch all the time. So after coming back, I got to sit down with a lot of these masks that I brought back from home, and also just investigate them for, the form of the mask, similar to what Picasso was doing after, his trips to the continent, but also investigate the history behind these masks, and how could I add on to that lineage, or what could I take from it and include into my practice as an artist myself. And I also just wanted to include here photos from the last studio where a lot of these masks were being made. And throughout the practice, the masks have developed to something else, which is exciting, because I love to revisit old works in my practice and figure out ways to make them in that moment and make them operate differently than what they used to. So we'll revisit what the masks look like presently later down the slideshow. Keeping an eye on Archie was, I'm the oldest of 4 boys. My 3 younger brothers are 25, 17, and 15. Archie is the one that comes after me, and I've always moved with this chip on my shoulder that I felt like I had to watch over my brother's keeper in a way. And my relationship with Archie has always been very close, and I wanted to depict that, but also I had to keep a lot of eyes on Archie. I had to grow, I feel at times I had to grow a different set of eyes just to keep on him and the rest of my siblings too. So I wanted to depict that in this piece, but also in the works, I'm very focused on just pushing the materials. And I wish we can experience these works in person, but because the photos don't do it justice. But in the works, I'm very interested in pushing the materials to I can't push no more in a way, because acrylic is very limited as a painting material, but I gravitate to acrylic just because of its limitations. And I want to know how I can make it work for me rather than just be acrylic. Because a lot of figurative painters that I know are more satisfied with what they get from oil. But for me, the fact that acrylic dries with plastic first intrigues me, but also the fact that I'm painting these black bodies in plastic, and the way we use plastic in our daily lives also intrigue me. So I like to keep that as in the background as I'm working. This is a piece of my grandfather I did in 2018. Again, this speaking on my work being autobiographic. In 2018, after visiting my grandfather, he passed in 2019, and he raised me while I was in Cameroon. So I feel like we didn't have enough time to catch up in a way. So I wanted to paint this space where the surrounding around him is a little bit of where I grew up to. It was this farm that we had in Cameroon, and we used to go to the farm every Sunday to harvest the crops. And I wanted to position him in the middle of all that because we had a great time in this space. But also, I wanted to see compositionally how I can weave. If you look into I wish I can get close to this, but if you get close to the jacket, for example, I wanted to see how I can put pattern and the movement into that. How can I capture the movement of the wind that was happening around this moment in the jacket without, having the jacket blowing off? And how can I capture that too with his environment, And one thing I forgot to mention too, music has a huge influence in my practice. I pretty much learned English through music in South Carolina, and at that time it was a lot of heavy hip hop because that's what we had around the South. But as of lately, I've been listening to a lot of jazz, and a lot of the artists that I'm listening to right now is Miles Davis, Fela Kuti, and Gil Scott. And just if you watch the way these strokes are applied, they kind of mimic musical notes in a way. I'll put one and I'll try to hold it as long as Fela Kuti will hold maybe a syllable or a sentence, and then I'll let go exactly when he let go. Or I'll play around with the whole song and try to see if I could maybe have just a side of the canvas depict a whole song while also focusing on the other side. This is again a portrait of Mo, which is a guy I made friends with around my first years in New York. There's an interesting story behind him, but I'll keep it short. I met Mo around my studio when I was in grad school, actually, and he used to love selling. He used to sell weed around the corner of my studio, and he tried to get me to buy weed from him for literally a year, and I always said no to him. But one day, because he became someone that I literally saw every day on my walk to the studio. So every time I didn't see him, I started subconsciously wondering what's happening to Mo because I knew what line of business he was in. So one day I walked up to him and I just said, "Hey, I would love to talk to you." Started talking to me, and he was taken aback because he's used to only approaching people. He's not used to people approaching him. So after listening to his story and how he got to where he got, I gathered that he was born here but moved to the continent when he was 3 years old, and then didn't move back till he was 15. And his idea of home was also kind of as blurry as mine. And I just wanted to capture that story and just him. And I invited him to my studio. And after long conversations, we arrived at, I think, I painted Mo about 3 times. So in my practice also, a lot of the times figures, I capture figures from my surroundings, my family, my close friends, but a lot of the times also throughout my journey in these unknown spaces, I encounter figures that become either part of my life or part of my practice, whereas Mo became part of my practice. Mom is Raining Again was based on these traditions that we share in Cameroon. And for me, one of the ones that I can remember more vividly was me going to stab a knife, whether it be a kitchen knife, in the ground to stop the rain. So in Cameroon, and I've realized after this, because for a while, I really thought that this was only happening in Cameroon. But after sharing this piece with the world, I had so many people reach out saying to me, "Wow, I used to do this in, a different part of Africa with their grandparents too." And I was like, wow, this is what creating is about, the connection of people. But for me, the way this was happening is that in Cameroon, because the ground is very red, and our president doesn't believe in paving the roads, so everything is unpaved. A lot of times whenever it rains, it becomes very, very muddy, and it becomes very hard to maneuver around the space. So to stop the rain, they'll send the firstborn of the family to stab a knife in the ground to stop the rain. And crazy enough, this thing worked every fucking time. You know, and these are the things that I like to question in my practice, because this was something that as a young child, I was just doing because I was told to do. But now I'm questioning how much of me really believed in it because I was the one doing it, you know, and it was happening to me at the same time. So this piece was to capture just that oral story that I was going through, and also just feeling like I wanted to hold on to this and hopefully to pass it down eventually down the future too. I did this series called Suspect Series, which was speaking directly to our systems. But this one was directly speaking onto the police brutality that was happening in the country at the moment, but also, again, relieving from my past, where a lot of the people that were around my schools in South Carolina were always stopped and frisked because they looked like, you know, every other Black guy, apparently. So I focused on these police lineups that they have. They'll have about 6 figures, and they'll bring in a witness, asking the witness to identify, you know, who the suspect is. But science and psychology proves to us that this is something that hasn't ever worked and that would never work. But because this is something that works for the police system, they keep using it to mass incarcerate a lot of these Black figures. So my idea behind this piece was that since to this country and to the police force, we all look the same, we might as well be the same person that is being stopped each time. So I took a portrait of a friend of mine that I met out here, and I painted him 6 different times. And in a way, I think I was also just exercising the idea of painting. How can I paint the same thing 6 times? You know, I always think in my head, first, I love painting as an exercise too. I literally paint every second that I can. But I always think that if you put 4 artists in the room and you ask them to paint an apple, you're gonna get like 4 different apples. But I always wonder, can you get 4 different apples from an artist, or can you get the same apple rendered differently, you know? So I painted this portrait 6 different times, and just to see what would also happen. And again, you can see with these portraits, I was really practicing or focusing, just moving the paint around. And this is made out of sand on the back and acrylic. And the sand came into my practice again when I was searching for these ideas of home. And in South Carolina, I started using sand when I was thinking to myself, why not just use these elements that would be used in traditional home building into the works as well? So these elements started getting into the work, the element of sand and wood, which would be used to building most of the houses that we had, that I was seeing around South Carolina. So I started putting that into the works too. And this is the last one, but there are 3 more that happened from this painting. And it's interesting because these first 3 were done in 2020, I think. 2020 or late 2019. And the last 3 were done in 2021. So in a way, it's also interesting to see where the hand is now and where the hand and the head was before. So I like to, as a self-practice thing and just a self-exploration thing, I like to revisit works like that. And these are install shoots for the show. This was at CFC here in Stockholm. And beginning of 2020, when we were all hit with the pandemic, I was living in New York at that very moment, but I knew how crazy New York was going to get because of the public transportation. And New York is just the mecca for a little bit of everything, especially viruses and diseases. So I grabbed my things and I ran to South Carolina to be with my family and loved ones at that very scary moment. And while I was in South Carolina, you know, I I felt like I was sheltering from so many different things, this virus, but then, the police killings were, and the Black Lives Matter movement was very rampant at that time too. So I wanted to capture what I was going through that in that specific moment, but also what I was hiding away from. We were supposed to be hiding away from people during this time, but I found myself hiding from people, but also running to people. So it was a very uncertain time. And I just wanted to capture myself. This is self-portrait. I wanted to capture myself in this little corner where I used to always be around when I used to live in my parents' house. But also I wanted to be in this vulnerable position that allowed me to just capture exactly what I was feeling from within. And you see this little flower here. It's supposed to be a sunflower engraved into the skin. And that's what I'm holding on to and just hoping for better days, and also this speaks to me as a Black man and as the oldest of 4 boys, because I wasn't always raised to show vulnerability. So I find ways in my work to show that side of myself. And lately I've tried to practice that in real life too. These are close-ups of the piece. And some of the things that I like to do with these works too is, because it's so hard to do any of this with acrylic, and especially the pulling back of these small hairs, because this is not painted on, this is just scratched out of the acrylic. And as we all know, acrylic dries literally in 2 seconds. So it's very, very hard to get anything like this from acrylic. So again, that challenge of not knowing what you're going to get from acrylic and pushing it to get somewhat what you want to get is interesting to me. So that's part of the struggles that I go through too. And if you look on the red part on the top, that's sand. And this is another close-up of that piece. And I remember why I put this close-up here. This armoire was owned by my grandfather, and it was in his room throughout the time that I lived with him. And after he passed, it was something that was almost passed down to me. So I also stayed in his room for a long time. So I almost felt like, this is my grandfather from my father's side, by the way. I felt like being around his things would bring us closer to. So I kind of wanted to include that in it. And also the juxtaposition of the ways that the two are painted. You have this is painted in a very tight manner. And then you have this figure that's just demanding space and texture wise. And this piece, Away from Home, came from that same time, which was the beginning of the pandemic in South Carolina. Growing up as a young boy in South Carolina, we did not play in the woods at all. We lived around woods, but we did not go into the woods, even though we heard a lot of kids in the woods, because we just didn't know what could happen to us as Black young men. So in 2020, I finally went back in the woods behind my house and actually walked around it as an adult. And even then, sitting there, I felt like this presence of being watched, which is a presence that I carry with me everywhere I went in South Carolina, especially convenience stores. And in these trees where I felt and I knew I was alone, but yet I still had this alarming presence behind me, just watching my every move. So I wanted to capture this with this figure that I encountered also while I was on a trip to Cameroon. And this figure also looked at me as if I didn't belong in Cameroon, even though I was home. So it was interesting for me to transfer that feeling rather than that figure into this space where I was feeling something very similar. So this is how we got into this. And I was at this very period, got even more interested in the mark making that are in the works right now. If you look closely, you see this little check marks, almost like checks of anxiety, but also they operate as skin marks, because in my tradition in Cameroon, we often got not familiar how to say it in English, but in French it's blendage, where we get small cuts, whether that be on the face or on any parts of the skin, and they will put herbs on the small wounds. And those were supposed to operate as protection from specific things. Like, for example, they would do some that are protection from evil spirits or even protection from snakes, you know, because in Cameroon, it's a tropical country, so almost everything is poisonous. And this is a close-up of that figure hiding in the back, watching me. I wanted to include some of my watercolors in this as well, because I really was introduced to painting through watercolor, I want to say. Well, not introduced to painting, but I fell in love with painting through watercolor. I was always attracted to its meditative side, because whenever I work, unlike my acrylic works where I work with, you know, my full body, I'm standing up and I'm working at the rhythm of just, you know, whatever I'm feeling at the very moment. And it's very expressive and it's very based on movement too, you know. And with these watercolors, this is the only time I'm sitting down and I'm contemplating each step, each move, and really feeling at one with this very thin piece of paper. And I also love its unforgiving qualities, because if you've ever used watercolor, you know how unforgiving watercolor is. Whatever you put down stays down. And yeah, so I wanted to capture, these watercolors were made in, I think, upstate, because I was interested in the light of the space up there. And in a lot of the works too, that I'll speak on later, mobility keeps recurring into my practice, because I as a kid, I was moving around a lot, but now as an adult, I've adapted to also just move around for the works, just to see what this movement brings these days into the work, because I know what me moving to this country has brought into my life. So a lot of the times I'll travel to different places just for the sake of creating works in that space, to see how that space finds itself into my work. And these are more watercolors. And I just love the juiciness that you get from, you know, this watercolor. And as thin as the paper is, it just absorbs literally every drip of water, so that you can just be left behind with this amazing blend of pigments. And watercolor at times just really does whatever it wants. And you're lucky if at the end you like what it did, because a lot of the times you just don't tell watercolor what to do. It just does whatever it wants. And a lot of the times I'm happy with what it gives me. And sometimes I just, you know, let it go and charge it to the game. This was one of a favorite piece of mine that I did, titled Blood on the Leaves. And I think this was towards the end of maybe my grad program, where I was thinking about working. I was thinking about labor, because throughout my life, I've always been working, I want to say. Before even my master's program, I had so many different experiences work-wise. So I was just thinking of the idea of working to plant a seed so hard that, you know, your fingers bleed onto these seeds, and then when the plant grows, it grows even with your blood on the leaves, you know. So that's a little bit of what I was thinking about behind this piece. And I love the softness that comes with this piece, even the way the figure blends into, you know, this whimsical, nostalgic background, and how deep some of these greens and blues play with each other too. And in my works, a lot of the times I use these underpaintings as a way to meet these figures in a spiritual level. So I believe in color being a spiritual element. So a lot of times my work start with this abstracted field of colors, and my job is to carve out a painting out of those colors in a way. And these underpaintings are really the most beautiful part of my practice, if I may say so. At times I feel like they're more beautiful than the finished paintings, but again, in the practice, I think there's a lot of, chaos and order to how do you destroy something so beautiful to create something else that could be maybe equally as beautiful or not as beautiful, but you just have to have that will to create so much that you don't focus too much on the beauty of what you're creating, but rather than the process of what you're creating and maybe the destination if you arrive at one. So now we're getting on to Don't Take This Too, which was also the title of my solo show that Lily mentioned at François Gambali in LA. Don't Take This Too, I think I wanted to also introduce this idea of a family as an ecosystem with also thinking about the motherland and a lot of the things that were taken away from us. On this piece, which encapsulates the show beautifully, you have this figure sitting on this cold piece of stone in this field of grass, holding on to this chicken that has its claws out, even directly next to the skin of this individual, but not harming him in a way, almost like protection. So as I mentioned before, the chicken is an animal that's used a lot in this voodoo tradition. So I was thinking with everything that has already been taken from the continent or from myself, because for me to become this American individual, I had to let go of a lot of what my identity as a Cameroonian was, so this was me holding on to part of that identity, saying, don't take this too. And this was the introduction to the piece. And I wanted this figure to be in this nervous, protective, but also soft state. And you can see that even with his lips, he looks like he's about to either beg or just say sorry for no reason. But I wanted him to be in, again, this vulnerable state. And for me, when I think of vulnerability, I can't think of a moment that I'm more vulnerable than the moment when I'm nude, and again, even with art history, we see that as a reoccurring motif. So I like to visit that as a placement in art history, but also as a way to investigate the vulnerability that comes with a nude body and a Black figure, a nude Black figure, which is, again, something that we've never seen throughout art history. And this is a close-up. And you can see in my work, I love texture. I always think to myself, how can I translate this in a way that you could feel with your eyes? I'm interested in looking, but I'm also interested more in feeling. And I think I'm getting to a place where I'm making the work tangible, and for you to able to even experience them throughout a photo. You look at this and you're like, oh wow, I can see how the light could fall under this blob of paint, or how the artist was thinking. And again, speaking on the jazz aspect too, you can see how a lot of these lines are literally single lines that don't stop till Fela Kuti say so, or Miles Davis say so. Yeah, I really missed this piece. And again, while investigating, this idea of a family as an ecosystem, I also wanted to talk a little bit about my time in South Carolina, and also what that Southern living did to me, and that Southern hospitality. And a lot of the times I just remember me, my brother, or some friends either sitting on a porch, just enjoying the day with a glass of sunny and just enjoying the sun rays, and to us, that was what the South was like in our small community. And when I thought about family in the South, I thought about what could be, not what is, So in a lot of the works, because I struggle with the idea of family and the idea of home, I always try to paint an idea of what could be rather than the idea of what is, because I'm already very familiar with what is in my life. So I like to play with the what ifs. So yeah, this is a close-up of that piece. And what I've also noticed is that in these works, I use a lot of photography too. And I'm interested in the decaying of photographs, or the way photographs present time in our present, you know. One of my favorite pastimes is to just go through photo albums of my family and discover individuals throughout this way. And a lot of the people that I've never met or don't even know, I've met them through photos and tried to meet them through, I was introduced to them through photos and tried to meet them through painting them. So a lot of my painting practice is about also dissecting a person and actually being introduced to that person for who they are throughout the painting. And you just get such an intimate moment while painting a single portrait or a single person, that you get to investigate every single fold and what really makes up this person. Also, I'm going to speed up a little bit because, like I said, I'll get carried away and I'll start talking more. We're still on the show at François Gambali, and right here we have The Absence of Memory, which was a figure of my mother in Cameroon that I wanted to capture. And with this, I just wanted to capture the dress as what's the word I'm looking for? As a transparent thing, but also her as a transparent figure that could just blow away with this wind. And as of lately, I've been playing around with these first layers of my paintings. When I was talking about these underpaintings, this is what a lot of them look like without being touched. But even this one, I can see I touched it a little bit. But a lot of the underpaintings, now I'm trying to see how they can be operational in, you know, the finished piece, rather than covering all of it too. Again, pulling and giving too. And this is a close up of that. I love the way these colors are playing around. And again, playing with the idea of watercolors, that you don't get what you want from watercolor, you get what watercolors give you. So the first process of these pieces take about 3 days, because I start them and then I leave them to dry in the studio on the floor. And then when I come back, they dry into whatever they want to dry. And this is Childhood Dreams, which speak on the family as an ecosystem right here. We have what a healthy family could be. You know, you have the father, you have the mother, you have the kids, and you have them all around this lovely TV set. And in my works, I love to pay homage to older paintings and traditions. So I wanted to include this piece that I shared with you guys earlier, Mom is Raining Again, in this piece. But also, if you look a little close right here on the corner, you could see an individual peeking into this idea of what a family could be. Again, speaking about what could be, not what is. So this is an idea that, you know, if I was able to find this idea of home into the work, this is what home could be. And this is an idea of maybe me looking into what home could be. And again, in this piece, I'm playing around with materials. And these are close-ups, and this is the sand on the bag. And it's been fun, you know, painting with sand, because the graininess of sand don't allow you to do anything. So it's been interesting trying to mix colors with that graininess and make it perform as the smooth paint too. Again, the textures is really what I'm interested in. And this is an installation shot of the show in the space. I love this painting. This was the beginning of You See Us, in the show that I showed in Italy. This was mid 2020. So this show, I'll give you a brief synopsis. The show was around the idea of migration, and also a lot of the refugee crises that were going on happening in Europe as a product of colonization. You know, you have a lot of these individuals that are running away from the situations that colonization put their country in, looking for reparations. But when they arrive at this European coast, they're being turned back because they don't belong or they're not supposed to be there. So I wanted to capture this just because myself, I'm an immigrant. I was just fortunate to migrate differently than a lot of these people. So I was thinking, how can I start this conversation, but also how can I be part of this conversation? So while the pandemic was going on, I thought for this work to reach its full potential, this work had to be made overseas. So again, the idea of mobility, I packed my studio up and I went to live in Spain for 2.5 months, I think. And this is when a lot of these works were created, because for me, it was important to paint these things that were happening mostly in Europe and really show the European population exactly what's happening in their backyard and they're not really focusing on. I painted a series of these passengers almost as passport photos, because my experience when I first arrived into the States, the first weeks was just me going around everywhere for documentation of my presence in the space. So I was thinking to myself, how can I document the arrival of these people to land or to a better day? So I thought, oh, just like myself, my documentation with passport photos and all that, how can I create that for these people too, as a signifier of that they made it? And also I was playing around with these underpaintings as an idea of these storms that these people went through. So I kind of wanted to push that behind them to show that they have overcame a lot of these adversities. And this is again from that same body of work, again, pushing what we believe or what I believe acrylic can do, and playing around with this idea of sand again, because for me, I was painting these individuals, excuse me, I was painting these individuals arriving at this shore. So, for me, it was important that I use sand, but also this sand was directly from this continent too, that was the first thing that they would touch. So it was important to kind of bring these things together. And this is currently showing at the Hyde Museum if you happen to be in Atlanta. This is one of my favorite pieces again, and it's a little heartbreaking. This is titled In Search of Reparations. And again, this is about, from these individuals going through these journeys from North Africa to parts of Europe. And this is depicting a group of passengers stranded at sea, searching for a better route and also just searching for reparations. And while I was painting, similar to the first painting that I showed with these figures poking out of the water, these figures kept reappearing in these paintings, not even planned, so I took that and I said, how can I push that further? So I started thinking, what if these figures are older passengers that have not been successful in their journeys, but were successful in transferring into the spiritual realm. Now they're returning as spirits to guide these passengers to better routes. So I started looking at them as, fallen angels that were around these waters to guide these passengers to safety or better routes. And pushing even that further, like I said before, I love to revisit older symbols into the work and see how I can push them to be their own thing. And I kept seeing or playing around with these heads poking out of water, and I started thinking, wow, part of my whole life, I've also been thinking about, I've just been navigating with my head above water, trying to make it to tomorrow. And especially growing up around the South, every Black man have their head above water and just maneuvering through our day. So after my trip back from Spain, I came back here and I started working on this body again, seeing how far I can push it on this land, because it was still about the same refugee crisis, but here it almost took another turn because it just became also about these Black figures Black males here navigating this world with their heads above water. This is titled Gates of No Return. Again, this is a depiction of that route coming from, this is part of Morocco right here. And this is entering into, I believe, Spain. And this is what happens to a lot of these immigrants as they're entering. A lot of them are stopped by, the guards and either beaten or killed and returned back to their homes, or some of them that happen to make it cross over, and the rest end up in this body of water. But also, if you look, you see, this is again just the underpainting that I'm playing and trying to cultivate that underpainting into being just as important as the foreground and these other paintings. So this is depicting a lot of these journeys that happen between these two lands. And I wanted to depict a lot of the things that we don't see or don't talk about. So this is where this came from. But also I wanted to join them in a way. And in my studio next door was in Spain, I had a metalsmith that was from the continent. And although he didn't speak English, we were able to communicate, and I commissioned him to create this metal piece. And for that metal piece, I was thinking about the police, the mass incarceration of Black bodies here in the States. And I wanted to play around with the idea of placing these shells that, maybe I should talk about the shells too. The shells, the curry shells that I spoke about earlier. So again, my work is a lot about regaining some of the powers that were taken away from the people. So I was thinking to myself while in Spain, how do I regain what this shell meant or means right now, So I started thinking, okay, these shells are found at the bottom of these waters, and they were used as currency. Can these shells actually be a direct representation of Black bodies or Black souls? So, because if you think of the bottom of the ocean, a lot of these Black bodies exist too. Now, at the bottom of the Mediterranean, and a lot of these Black bodies too. So I was playing around with those politics, and I started placing these shells that I painted black and red to symbolize these souls that were lost throughout these migrational journeys. And I started placing them on top of these fence in here. And this was a representation of our prison cells that we have here in the States. And I placed these shells here. And there's something else down the line that I did with these shells too. And this is just me putting this together. This took so much time. And this is in the studio that I was working out in Spain. Probably the best studio I've ever worked out of. It was huge. You could drive an 18-wheeler truck into the studio. We drove a smaller truck in, so yeah. And speaking on the mask that I mentioned earlier, so at first when I was working on the mask, it went from paper to canvas, and those were just more about capturing something. But the feeling that I got from participating in a lot of the ceremonies weren't really, I really wasn't seeing that being pushed throughout the canvas or the paper. So I started thinking to myself, how do I bring this more forward? So I started working with wood, because these masks traditionally were made from wood. So I wanted to continue that lineage. So I started painting these masks on birch wood, already cut out from masks that I was sourcing from different parts of West Africa, but also some masks that I started just inventing myself. And this is the installation shots of the show in Italy. Again, these are the masks. And at the bottom of this piece are the shells that I was just speaking on again. And this is one of my favorite masks. It's from, again, the Bamileke tribe that I was speaking about from Cameroon. And these are just a collection of masks that interest me, but also masks that hold cultural significance to the people back home. These are works that were made in 2021. These were shown at the Armory. With these works, I was revisiting living in Cameroon and just being surrounded by these red mud and how that mud became you. And also I was thinking of the fact that, we come from sand and we return from sand. So back in Cameroon, we used to live in this mud house that was constructed with, hands and just the application of a mud on hand. And you can, in every house that you saw, you could see literally the fingerprints of everyone that worked on the house. So I wanted to also show that with this piece. So this piece, I was actually painting the whole background with just my fingers, almost like I was building this house. I was grabbing huge amounts of paint with my hand and just slapping it on top of the canvas like I was actually building this home. And this comes from that same body of work. And this is then, it was a two-person show. So this is the installation of that. Seeing green, a while back in my practice, I always had a hard time painting with greens. Mixing greens were always a hard thing for me, but I think I'm starting to understand the Lumino, and I know most painters understand. It's not easy. So a lot of the times before working on challenging pieces, I start with a smaller version just to understand the color and just to understand the way the light will be working with these colors. So this is the piece that I did in preparation for a piece that I'm about to show next. This was Seeing Green. This is the piece that the other piece was preparing for, Nicole in Blue. And this is a portrait of my mother as a schoolgirl. And again, you see these mark makings in the back representing those small cuts that I was speaking about. And I've always just been interested in the idea of mark making because from the existence of humanity, all we have as what's the word I'm looking for? All we have as proof of our existence are marks, So again, for my people, marks are a huge part of the culture. So in my work, just the idea of just making mark or repetition of patterns is something that I'm very driven by. And again, the idea of family, building family, what family could look like, what does family mean, where does family come from, what means family, is something that I've always struggled with. And in this piece is portrayed from a family house that we always visited in South Carolina for the holidays. So again, I wanted to capture this peaceful family celebrating something together. Again, speaking on the what could be. And I was watching a lot of fantasy TV at that time, and I'm very interested in astrology too. So a lot of the times I see different worlds being created into the paintings, or like the paintings peeking into different worlds. So there's always, every time there's a door in the works, there's always a little opening or window showing into a different space, whatever that space may be. And these are just close-ups. I love his smile. This is a self-portrait that I did for a show at Jeffrey Deitch. It was a show put together by Kihinda Wiley, and with this show, I just wanted to speak on, myself. And this piece was done also around the time where I started doing therapy, so I started learning so much about myself. And I wanted just to show that through this piece, and I'll speak a little bit on that. The idea of the snake is my last name, Nkoth, in my dialect means Black Mamba. So again, that was me speaking on my family and my heritage and how I'm existing with all that presently. It's a little map of Africa, but there's a story behind that too. And this is just a quick shot of the piece in the beautiful space. This was from a show I opened in November, a two-person show here in New York with a close friend of mine. So protected from protection, again, we have the symbolism of the chicken legs and the chicken coming into perspective. And in this one, I was thinking about the idea of the rabbit's foot and the chicken legs, because, we use the chicken in rituals that are supposed to be as protection. But here in the States, we have the rabbit foot, which operates as, as a good luck charm thing, but also in a way as protection. So this is a portrait of my younger brother, Serge. And because the last borns weren't really introduced into our traditional ways from back home, and they really haven't visited that much or being, what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't really exposed to a lot of that. So I always wonder, are they still protected by the same spirits I'm protected by, even though, because we share the same blood, but we're from two different places, And this is a portrait of a younger male figure visiting. This is from a memory of mine, visiting a church in Hilton Head. And we visited this island that was the only island where a lot of the slaves could go and worship. So I just remembered how haunting this experience was for me. And I was recollecting this painting through memory. So I remember how the texture of the space was alarming to me. So I wanted to remake that with the patterning, but also just the scraping of the wood grain into the chairs, because I always run my hand on everything just to feel the texture. I'm very tactile. It's annoying sometimes. So I just wanted to feel, or again, with the eye, allow you to feel what this memory could feel like, what's feeling like for me. And also, as a quick side note, I grew up in a very religious family, but then all of a sudden it wasn't too religious anymore. And then a few more things happened between that. So I always like to play around with the idea of religion and how it served. For example, a lot of the African countries were colonized by using religion, and the missionaries were brainwashing these people to believing that, the God, all that. So I play around with religion as a way of also finding out where we sit in this current space. And this is a portrait of my younger brother and myself, the Promised Land. Archie was also born in South Africa. So we both moved here at different times, but we were supposed to be coming to the Promised Land, So here we both became citizenship through naturalization. And this is the meaning behind a lot of these colors. But yet we still don't see the Promised Land that we were promised, After relinquishing, for myself, my Cameroonian nationality, I had to let go of that to become an American citizen. So this piece speaks a lot on that. And this is the install of the show here in New York. And again, speaking on the curry shells, I started playing around with the idea of making things as sculptures too. So I recreated this curtain that I grew up with in my grandparents' house, made out of beads. And as a kid, I used to run through them and they made this sound. And every time I hear that sound, it kind of transports me back to that moment. So I was thinking, how could I take these shells and intertwine that history with my memories of childhood? So I recreated these curtains made out of entirely curry shells, painted black and red, but also hand tied together. And it took maybe, I think, 6 months to put this together. And we had to have like, I think, a team of 6 or 7 people working on this. This is a little closer look. And I was imagining this as almost a portal into the work, where when you go through, you're transported into the space where spiritual realm, where your ancestors could be, or anything like that. But I was just thinking of going through a portal when I was making this thing. And again, patterning as well. And this is a self-portrait of myself as a younger schoolboy in Cameroon. Again, speaking on the idea of, just chicken and the bird, my offering came from the idea of sacrificing something for protection, or for, mostly for protection. So I was thinking about protection through this piece, and I was offering something for protection. And with this one, again, I wanted to play with, these colors and these trees. I have I've noticed that the way I paint trees, they always have this living personality, whereas they're no, the spiritual personality where they're operate as trees, but they're almost see-through in a way, you know. And again, we think about these masks that are supposed to represent the spiritual figures, but then these masks are made from specific trees that are supposed to be spiritual too. So I'm thinking in my practice, whenever I'm painting a tree or anything like that, can that tree be can that tree evoke spirituality in a way? So I think it's interesting that a lot of these trees are like that. And again, the mark making, the blendage, as I said in English. And this last piece was one of the last pieces that I made in 2021. And this was a portrait of a close friend of mine that became a police officer after everything that we've been through. And so it was mixed feelings with this piece, because I was also thinking of Kerry James Marshall's piece of the police officer while working on this. And I was thinking about the police brutality that was going through in the country at the time. But yet I was meeting this friend of mine that I literally grew up with in this country. And I was meeting him through painting him as this thing that we are not always welcomed by, you know. So it was tricky trying to portray a loved one while portraying something that's not very loved too. So that was the battle with officer role. I think that is it for me. That was my last slide. Thank you guys. I hope I didn't go too much over time. Sorry if I did.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. Lily did have to go, so I will wrap things up. And we did go over time. So there are a few questions. Hopefully you were able to satisfy the answers through, you know, they were posted earlier in the lecture. But let's see. So I will ask this one, like, who are some of your artistic influences?
You know, my undergrad, I did this paper on Norman Lewis, and he off the back became someone that I looked up to. I loved his abstract pieces. I love his mark making. I love his use of color. I love the spiritual element in his work. And then also I think of Charles White, someone else, like the way he portrayed a Black figure with so much strength and so much light is something that I really respond to. And I love a lot of contemporary artists like Inda Jacker Crosby, Toyin.
Sorry, Toyin is from where I'm from, so.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. She's just such a great artist.
Right.
Yes. So those are a little bit of my influences. And of course, after that, we go down the canon of art history.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I can't wait to talk to you later. I'd like to also thank everyone who came out for this week's Visiting Artist Program lecture with Ludovic Nkoth. And we hope that you enjoyed, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. And I will now stop the recording.